F1 teams just found a single sentence in the FIA rulebook, and it could erase Mercedes' entire engine advantage overnight. We're talking about a hidden gain worth up to 4/10 per lap, a system so powerful it helped Mercedes dominate the opening races and build a lead of over 40 points before anyone could react. But here's what makes this explosive. Mercedes didn't break the rules. They found what the rules forgot. A missing condition. A blind spot. And now, that blind spot has been exposed. Because the moment the FIA defines it, Mercedes doesn't just lose performance. They lose the foundation of their engine. Which means the fastest team on the grid could suddenly become vulnerable. And here's the part that changes everything. Mercedes already used it. They already won with it. They already built the gap. So now the real question is not what they're about to lose. It's whether what they already gained is enough to survive what's coming next. At first, no one thought that rule mattered. It was just one line, buried inside pages of technical regulations. A simple definition about engine limits. Nothing controversial. Nothing exciting. The kind of detail teams read once and move on. But Mercedes didn't move on. Because while everyone else saw a limit, they saw a gap. Not in the number, but in the conditions behind it. Because the FIA defined the maximum compression ratio, but never defined when that limit had to apply. And that changes everything. Because an engine doesn't behave the same way at all times. Cold, it's stable. Predictable. Easy to measure. But hot, under real racing conditions, it becomes something else entirely. Materials expand. Pressures rise. Combustion changes. And that's where Mercedes found their advantage. They didn't break the rule. They built around its weakest point. Inside the engine, they created a tiny extension of the combustion chamber. A micro-solution. So small, it looked irrelevant. But it wasn't. Because during FIA inspections, that extra volume is included. The engine sits exactly at the legal limit. 16:1. Perfectly compliant. But once the race begins, once temperatures climb, that same system behaves differently. The extra volume effectively disappears. And suddenly, the compression increases. Beyond the limit. Into a range no other team can reach. And that's where the performance comes from. More efficient combustion. More power. More speed on every straight. And the most dangerous part? It's consistent. Repeatable. Invisible. Because to the FIA, everything still looks legal. And for a while, that was enough. Mercedes dominated. Controlled races. Built a gap that no one could explain at first. But inside the paddock, engineers started to notice something strange. Because the data didn't match expectations. The engine looked normal in testing, but exceptional on track. And that contradiction is what triggered everything. Because in Formula 1, when performance doesn't match the numbers, there's always a reason. And once teams started digging deeper, they stopped asking how Mercedes was faster, and started asking when. Because the performance wasn't constant. It appeared under specific conditions. Heat, load, real racing stress. And that's when the realization hit. This wasn't just engineering. It was interpretation. A smarter way of reading a rule that wasn't fully defined. And once that idea spread, the entire paddock reacted. Not by trying to copy it, but by trying to eliminate it. Because if one team finds speed inside a gray area, the fastest way to close the gap is to remove the gray area completely. And that's exactly where this story starts to change. Because the moment the FIA looks at that same rule again, with that same missing condition in focus, everything Mercedes built is suddenly at risk. And the moment the FIA took a second look, everything escalated. Because this was no longer about Mercedes. It was about the rule itself. About whether the regulation was actually controlling performance, or just pretending to. At first, the FIA defended their position. The engine had been checked, validated, approved. Everything was legal. End of discussion. But the problem didn't go away. Because the data kept telling a different story. On track, Mercedes was gaining performance in conditions the rule was supposed to limit. And that contradiction became impossible to ignore. So the FIA changed its approach. They stopped asking if the engine passed the test, and started asking if the test made sense. Because if you measure something in conditions that don't exist during a race, you're not measuring reality. You're measuring a version of it. And Mercedes had built their entire advantage inside that difference. So the FIA did something subtle, but devastating. They didn't ban the system. They didn't accuse Mercedes. They simply completed the rule. They added the missing condition. Temperature. Real operating conditions. The environment where performance actually happens. And with that single addition, the entire advantage collapses. Because now, the engine has to comply not just in theory, but in reality. And in reality, the numbers don't match anymore. The compression exceeds the limit. The system no longer fits inside the regulation. And just like that, what was once perfectly legal becomes unusable. Not gradually, instantly. And this is the moment Mercedes feels the impact. Because this isn't a small adjustment. It's not a minor loss. It's the removal of the core idea behind their engine. The concept that made everything else work. Without it, the car changes. The balance shifts. The power delivery becomes less efficient. Drivers feel it immediately. Confidence drops. And performance follows. But here's where the tension reaches another level. Because this decision didn't come before the season. It came after Mercedes had already used the advantage. After the wins. After the points. After building a lead that still stands. Which creates a situation no one is comfortable with. The advantage is gone. But the damage is done. And now, the championship is split in two. Before the rule was completed. And after. And those two phases could not be more different. Because before, Mercedes controlled everything. Now, they have to defend it. And defending in Formula One is where things get dangerous. Because every race becomes a risk. Every strategy becomes pressure. Every mistake becomes amplified. And on the other side, every rival sees the same thing. Opportunity. Because now they're not chasing something untouchable. They're chasing something real. Something beatable. And once that belief appears, everything changes. They push harder. They take more risks. They close the gap faster. And Mercedes is no longer dictating the pace. They are reacting to it. And that shift is where championships are won or lost. And this is where the real collapse begins. Not in one moment. Not in one race. But in the accumulation of pressure. Because once Mercedes loses that hidden edge, everything becomes harder. The straights feel longer. The exits feel slower. The margins disappear. And in Formula One, when the margin disappears, so does the control. At the start of the season, Mercedes dictated everything. They chose the pace. They controlled the strategy. They forced everyone else to react. But now, they are the ones reacting. Covering undercuts. Defending positions. Adjusting to rivals who are suddenly much closer than before. And that shift is brutal. Because it changes how you race. Drivers stop pushing freely. They start managing. Protecting. Thinking one step ahead, not to attack, but to survive. And that costs time. Tiny amounts at first. A fraction here. Another there. But those fractions add up. Until one day, you're no longer leading comfortably. You're fighting. And on the other side, everything accelerates. Ferrari finds confidence. Red Bull sharpens execution. Every team senses the same thing. This is the moment. Because once a dominant team becomes vulnerable, they don't just get challenged. They get attacked. Relentlessly. Lap after lap. Race after race. And Mercedes can feel it. In the data. In the strategy calls. In the way races unfold. Because now, they are no longer ahead of the curve. They are inside it. And that's dangerous. Because inside the fight, there is no protection. No hidden advantage. No extra margin to fall back on. Just pure performance. And right now, that performance is no longer unmatched. But here's the deeper problem. They can't go back. That advantage is gone permanently. The rule is complete. The gap is closed. Which means the only way forward is to find something new. Another interpretation. Another edge. But now, every team is watching. Every innovation is questioned. Every gain is analyzed immediately. And the FIA is reacting faster than ever. So the window Mercedes used before may never exist again. And that changes everything. Because now, they are not just racing their rivals. They are racing time. Trying to adapt before the gap disappears completely. Trying to defend a lead that is no longer growing. Only shrinking. And that leads to the final turning point. Because at some point, holding on is no longer enough. At some point, the pressure breaks through. And when it does, the championship changes hands. Which is why everything now comes down to one final question. Not whether Mercedes was the smartest team at the start. They were. Not whether they built the best engine under the original rule. They did. The real question is this. Can they survive long enough? Without that advantage? Before the rest of the grid finally catches them? And now, everything comes down to the final stretch. Because there's a moment in every championship where momentum becomes irreversible. And Mercedes is getting dangerously close to that moment. Not because they've suddenly become slow, but because they've lost the one thing that made them untouchable. Control. At the beginning, they were ahead of the system, ahead of the rules, ahead of every other team. They weren't just racing, they were dictating how the season would unfold. But now, that advantage is gone. And with it, the certainty. Because when you remove a hidden edge like that, you expose everything else. Every weakness, every limitation, every detail that was previously covered by raw performance. And suddenly, those details matter more than ever. A circuit with fewer straights, a setup that's slightly off, a qualifying lap that isn't perfect. Before, those things didn't change the result. Now, they do. And that's where championships start to slip away. Not in dramatic moments, but in quiet ones. A second place instead of a win. A fourth instead of a podium. A race where you defend instead of attack. And those results? They accumulate. Until the lead you built early no longer protects you. But here's the part that makes this story so tense. Mercedes still has that lead. They are still ahead. Still in control, on paper. But on track, it's different. Because now, every race feels closer. Every battle feels real. Every rival feels dangerous. And that's the shift that changes everything. Because once a team realizes you can be beaten, they don't hesitate. They push harder. They take risks they wouldn't take before. They fight in places they would have avoided. And that's when the pressure becomes constant. Relentless. Impossible to escape. And Mercedes knows it. Because they've been on the other side of this before. They know how quickly a dominant season can turn. How fast a lead can disappear. How small the difference is between control and collapse. But here's the final twist. The one detail that defines everything. Mercedes doesn't need to dominate anymore. They just need to survive. Because those early races, those wins, that massive advantage built before the rule was completed, still counts. Every single point. And that creates a fragile balance. They are ahead, but exposed. Leading, but under attack. And the championship now exists in that tension. Between what they already achieved, and what they can still lose. So the final outcome of this story is no longer about innovation, or loopholes, or even the FIA. It's about resilience. About whether Mercedes can hold on long enough. Because if they can, then they didn't just build the fastest car. They built the smartest season. They exploited the gap, used the time, maximized the moment before it disappeared, and turned it into something permanent. But if they can't, if the pressure breaks through, if the gap disappears before the finish line, then this becomes something else entirely. A story about how in Formula One, being too far ahead, too early, can sometimes be the beginning of the end.